Hello, everyone, and welcome to our dating show, The Nerdy Affair, where we take a blind date with our favorite tabletop role-playing game hobby and some pop culture media stuff. I'm your host, Cody.
And I'm your other host, Joe, live from Podcast Studios.
Yeah.
Oh, but before we begin, Cody.
Yes.
Well, if you look down the street there, do you see that group of adventurers that you are with?
Yes, I do see them.
That was.
I don't know what this voice is. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Because it's like if you ever watch old game shows, like I did growing up for the majority of my life, like they have an accent that is like I don't know what it's supposed to be. I think it's literally just like generic, like. And
it's got a little bit of I don't know. It's got like some announcer vibes. Like it's just like there's like some power behind every word, you know.
Well, so here's a fun little fact for you. I don't know when this ended, right? But like, if you were going for like a national television show, if you were trying to go for like NBC or ABC or like the evening news or now these 24-hour news stations or whatever, like for the most part, they didn't want people with accents, like any traceable accent on it.
Right.
Because like the idea was that it's like anyone tuning in from like, you know, New York, California, Alabama, Minnesota, you know, Florida, wherever, like, you know, they sound like they're from nowhere, so they could be from anywhere. And I guess that one of the places that people would often get sent to for like accent school was Cleveland, because they determined that Cleveland had about as neutral an accent as possible. Wow.
Okay. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. And then, you know, this philosophy kind of changes over time, and things like that. Or at the very least, it's like, you know, like, hey, if you're like a local news anchor, then go for it. Right. But,
right.
Yeah. So like, I feel like those guys, like, it was just kind of like a heightened non-accent. But anyway.
Right.
So last time on You and a Group of Adventurers, I posed Cody with this query to remind our fans. It is you and a group of adventurers, team of adventurers, need to protect your homeland from your relative who is trying to exploit its resources. This is a multi-genre thing, but specifically movie.
You know, and I've been thinking since we do this bi-weekly now.
Yes.
I have been racking my brain, and I have no idea. I concede. You have won this one.
It is Black Panther.
Oh, son of a bitch!
Yeah.
Oh, now I feel dumb.
No.
Yeah, that's true. Oh my god! I'm piecing the.
He has a little crew. He was fighting his cousin Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah.
From stealing all the vibranium and sending out all those weapons around the world.
Right. Well, congratulations! You pulled the wool over my eyes on one that I should have known, and I feel the fool. You have fooled me for the last time.
But anyway, what do you got for me?
So this week, the new one is totally planned and prepped and handcrafted with love, and not literally moments before recording. You and a group of adventurers must stop a famous public figure from releasing a technological doomsday.
Okay. A famous what figure?
Public figure.
Famous public figure.
So someone who's well known.
Okay. I'll think on
I will accept a few answers here, but there is like the bonus point, like, because like this could be a lot of different things, but
yeah, there's a couple that are bouncing around my brain at the moment.
Yeah. So for all of you out there, one last time before we get into the content, you and a group of adventurers must stop a famous public figure from releasing a technological doomsday. tweet your answers at us at fandomr_podcast on Twitter.
Hell yeah.
That being said, we're getting into a nerdy affair. We've got tabletop role-playing games as always in the left corner, but this tabletop role-playing game is the fifth edition from Wizards of the Coast. You can be whatever you want to be. It's Dungeons and Dragons. And then, applause and everyone's really happy.
I'm going into wrestler announcer.
I definitely felt a shift in the narrative a little bit.
I was about to say in this corner, and I was like, no.
And this dark and gloomy night.
To introduce this blind date. This series is the series that maybe started it all. It's the Lord of the Rings.
Nice.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings. Woo. Okay, I want to start off by saying like a little thing. So this one is interesting because D&D is literally Gary Gygax trying to do Lord of the Rings for him and his friends. And
100%.
So here's the thing. Lord of the Rings, pretty fucking awesome. I love Lord of the Rings a lot. It was kind of my entry point into all things nerdy. If you think about it as a campaign, it's not the most exciting campaign.
It's definitely weird. It's not what most people would see as a standard 5th edition tabletop role-playing game. Now, there are some aspects for sure that fit the mold. I mean, obviously, it's, Lord of the Rings is fantasy, and there's a ton of heroism.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, like, you fight, like, a small selection of enemies.
Yeah.
It's kind of low magic, all things considered.
Yeah, I mean, a lot. Yeah, it's definitely low magic considering that, like, the concept of magic is basically literal aliens came down to this earth to, like, muck about.
Well, gods, but...
Well, yeah, whatever.
And
you
like,
call them gods, I call them aliens.
And, like, the loot is terrible. Like, come on, one of the few magical items you get is literally world ending. What kind of DM would do that?
I can't say that I have or have not done that before.
But I've been thinking of some potential things that might be done to turn this into, give you something that feels kind of epic. So I want to
hold on, before we get into the meat of this, I want to preface this whole thing. First and foremost, yes, I know, we know, or maybe we know, we'll know now, that there are literal Lord of the Rings books out there right now. Like, there are tabletop role-playing games that exist that very much cater to this. And with some searching, some people have done this work for you. However, that is not what we like to do. Personally, I love D&D 5e because I know it really well, and it fit, like, and it's so modular in the way it works that with some tweaks of the fundamentals, you can kind of make whatever you want. And so that's how I like to play these, sort of things. I want to tweak and mess with this game so that we can. Because, like, at the end of the day, buying 1 to 4 more books just so that you can potentially play Lord of the Rings is kind of expensive. Yeah. Especially because most of the time those books are, like, anywhere between $30 and $50. So, that being said, what is your first tweak to 5th edition to make it Lord of the Rings?
So, imagine for a second doing Helm's Deep as an encounter.
Love it. Already on board.
but here's the thing, it's something I always like to talk about. Every round of D&D is approximately 6 seconds.
Yeah.
The Battle of Helm's Deep is approximately 40 minutes of runtime, probably somewhere around there.
Something like that. I wouldn't know the specifics, but did you do the math?
I did not do the math on this, but I do not know any party that I have ever personally played with that would be willing. It means you would probably spend at least a full. If you were to play it out in real time, that'd be about a full month of combat.
Oh,
sessions.
Absolutely.
So, but here's the thing. I wouldn't want to do that. But these big, vast, epic horde battles are something that really makes the Lord of the Rings special. So I kept thinking to myself, how do you pull these off? And so here's my suggestion, which would be you would have a multiple, you could have like a multi-day siege or fight or things like that. And then you would have highlight encounters that could include things like, specifically for Helm's Deep, blowing up the wall, the battle at the gate, the doorway, and the charge of Theoden out of the Hornburg.
So this is I did the math.
Pardon?
I did the math.
You did the math.
I did the math. So if the runtime was 40 minutes, I rounded it down. I know it was 45, but if you were to do standard D&D, it would be 2,400 rounds.
That's insane.
Insane.
Admittedly, it's a party of 3, so it might move a little bit quicker, but it still would not be like a quick. By no definition would it be quick or punchy.
Definitely not.
So here's what. So here's what you do. I would have highlight encounters or highlight moments. This is when you would get into those nitty gritty dice rolls. This is where you'd have your more traditional combat encounters. This is where you might have your credible. You might have your bigger threat. But what you would do is, as you're moving between those encounters, you just let your players describe kicking ass. Just like no dice rolls. It's just like you are just tearing ass through, crowds of goblins. Describe how you're killing them with your axe, your bow, and your sword. And then it's like, here comes 20 heavily armored Uruk-hai coming up the rampway to the main door. And then now this is when you roll for initiative, or you do your fast slow initiative, or whatever your table is using. And this is when you start doing things like, what's your AC, what's their AC, things like that. So you can still have the scope of an epic battle. You can still have an army of 10,000 or whatever, they end up fighting. But you're not necessarily spending, more than, in theory, two sessions on this big epic battle. So that was was my first big tweak. All right, Cody, do you have a tweak for me?
I've got several, but the big one, I think the most fundamental one for a Lord of the Rings game, is magic.
Okay.
I think it's D&D 5e is so embedded, or D&D in general is so embedded in magic that doesn't really fit the narrative of Lord of the Rings. Because magic is given to very specific people, and those people are literal gods, as I've learned today. So basically I would start by stripping the magic classes that rely heavily on their lore to produce their abilities. So like wizards, sorcerers, warlocks, those are not PCs, right? Those are potentially NPCs that you might interact with, and they'd be very few and far between, but they are not something the character would play. Now, that being said, I know that D&D is balanced around the idea that players have access to magic for things such as healing and solving a lot of these, complicated puzzles and stuff. However, 4th edition had a very good approach to this, and that everyone got a heal to some degree. Whether it's like basically the fighters have a very kind of weakened version of it, but either having access to other healing options would alleviate a lot of the magic balance, and, perhaps replacing potions of healing with like healing salves or herbal remedies that are easily available to the party would help in this situation. I think you can also reflavor some of the classes so that they don't include magic, such as my two are the Ranger and the Bard. Mm-hmm. I think arguably the Ranger spells are meant to almost be like, oh, I know so much about the forest that I can find things to heal you, or I can set up a trap so that the oncoming orc band is ensnared in some kind of trap. Bards, very similarly, they can inspire people with their moving tails and their voices. I would be willing to use some of those magic classes and reflavoring their kind of magical properties as like things they have, like, it's part of their toolkit, but it's not magic. It's like actual things that they have. And reflavoring the spells as abilities and things. And I think that goes a long way to making Lord of the Rings feel like Lord of the Rings, personally. The magic needs to be magical, and if everyone just has access to magic, or, your party has its own version, like, it'd be weird if you were playing Lord of the Rings with your friends, and one of you was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm motherfucking Gandalf. And everyone's like, what the fuck? You could be him? That's shit. I'm just a fucking, like, a halfling with a sword. Like, it would be so shitty, at least in my opinion. Or, in the other case where it's like, well, we all picked Gandalf, and basically we're all just gods at that point, so we won. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like the Wizards add an interesting level of balance issue to Lord of the Rings, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one of my big tweaks. To get that feel is you're definitely going to have to take out some classes and definitely add in options for healing and solve it. Like, you'd also need to make sure that you're not creating puzzles and problems that people can't solve, or that people can only solve with magic, which is something that does happen in 5e when you're encounter building, because it's like, well, their party has a bard or a cleric or whatever, and in this case, you may not have that.
Yeah. So I think that actually kind of transitions nicely into my thing, which is I feel like another aspect about Lord of the Rings is that it's pretty, or the movies at the very least, it's very combat heavy. But I think one of the things that makes D&D special is that it's a collection of things, right? You have your riddles, and you have your puzzles, and you have your social encounters and things like that. So Tolkien's famous for his lore. Anyone who's read the books knows that there's a lot of poems and stories and statues and histories to digest. And so I feel like you can, take this lore, this knowledge, and use it to incorporate it into more, adding more D&D elements to it, right? So, like, I think a good example is, like, the Doors of Moria is, like, the closest thing the party encounters to, like, an honest-to-God puzzle.
Right.
And then outside of that, it's pretty smooth sailing from there. But, I think that's something that kind of makes D&D special. So if you can establish potentially, something where you have to place a weird relic of Tolkien's world to, get you to that next step, D&D is more than just combat. And so I feel like you can really dip into Tolkien's lore to really allow that to happen. So that was my big tweak number 2.
Nice. I would say the next two that I have, one's really small, and we kind of go over it in another episode, so I'll keep that one short. But for this one, this is my other big one, and that's traveling. Lord of the Rings is just a giant journey through the world of whatever it's called.
Middle Earth.
Middle Earth, thank you. God damn it. I am a professional. That being said, in a lot of cases, D&D doesn't do... Well, okay. I don't want to say it doesn't really explain how to do traveling in an interesting way. I just think that people are so used to the idea of kind of modern day D&D where a lot of times, and me included, I'm not going to exclude myself, but like the idea of traveling to a destination isn't part of the journey, but like what is there is the journey, you know, or like the experience. Yeah. So I would think there's two ways to do this to make traveling through Middle Earth mean something. And a lot of that, or I think a big part of that, is having a big like hex map or a big open map that that your players can actually use as a tool to get from the starting, the Shire, if you want to really kind of dig up on Lord of the Rings. If you want to do the whole thing, make the map and be like, there are tons of different options, but like, here's the way, you know, and then maybe your players can look at the big map and go, oh man, what if we went here? That place looks cool. Or man, I really want to see what the dwarven city of Moria looks like or whatever. Like having that map or a big map is really cool and can be a very interesting way to, make traveling exciting by having a visual representation of what's to come. Plus, you don't even have to make a map. There are tons of pre-made fantasy maps, and I'm sure there's tons of Middle Earth maps. I didn't check, but I have to imagine there is. So using those and putting a hex grid on top of it is a great way to, like, you know, be like, oh shit, like, we can go here, or we can do that. I also think encounter tables can help with this as well. If you're kind of struggling to find things to plan out for each hex grid. And Xanathar's Guide to Everything has really good examples of what these tables can look like, but I would be cautious. Make those tables believable to your setting. Don't just pull from Xanathar's Guide to use as like, oh, they're in the mountains, I'm just going to pull that from the mountains, because if a monster that is typically a swamp-ish creature ends up in the mountains and you don't have a really good explanation for that, it can kind of be jarring and pull players out of the experience. So tables are really good. Use Xanathar's as a guide to make these, but don't just copy them unless they happen to fit the narrative that you're trying to do. And then
wait,
and I think
Cody, Xanathar's Guide to what?
Everything.
Everything?
Everything. We haven't made that bit in a while.
We haven't brought up Xanathar's Guide to Everything in a while.
It's true. But that being said, also having key points of interest with detailed, maybe mini adventures or dungeons. Like, shit, Mines of Moria could be a dungeon, for sure. It's a great way to fill out your map with interesting stuff. Ideally, these areas should be filled with encounters and death traps and loot to aid them on their quest. And the other thing that I would say, and normally I don't want to do this, because it's not how I run my game, but I think if you want an authentic Lord of the Rings traveling system, you have to use the D&D travel rules that I often like hand wave out of games, such as water and food consumption, tracking your supplies, how far you can go, your encumbrance, like you can't just carry around 27 swords. I think typically in my games, I don't do that because that's not the kind of thing that interests my players. But if you want traveling to be on its own detrimental or like have some impact, you need to have things like, resources that they have to use as they travel. That being said, I think there is a way to mitigate some of that by creating like kind of vague resources, like having a supply resource that you spend money to upgrade that tier, or maybe it's a die, or maybe it's maybe it's just a number, and every time you travel through a day, you subtract one or whatever. And there are lots of ways to abstract some of the resource gathering so it's not super nitty gritty, but still have that same impact. But I think these rule sets create interesting choices. So, for instance, does the party continue to rush toward the village and potentially be spotted by local war riders? Or do you skulk through the woods, spending a little more time getting to the village, but, you know, avoiding them, and then, you know, if you don't make it in time, maybe something bad happens, or maybe they don't have enough food to necessarily sneak around. So, like, there are interesting choices that can be made by giving a resource that the players have to manage. And then last, but certainly not least, on the idea of traveling, when building your own adventure, like say you're not just ripping Lord of the Rings, it's about setting up interesting encounters. So, like, for a lot of people, you know how to build a dungeon, you build rooms, and then you build encounters within those rooms. It's the same thing with traveling. It's just instead of being in a dark, damp stone hallways or, you know, throne rooms or whatever, the setting is in the woods right outside of town, or the swamps on their way to the new destination. Things are going to continue to happen throughout the adventure, and you just need to set it up like you would, you know, the same way you'd set up a dungeon, having encounters and encounter chances happen as they progress through the grounds. The outside world is just as dangerous as those, you know, areas that you go to kill dragons and get loot.
Yeah. And then my last little point is that this thing needs to be epic.
Oh, yeah.
So Lord of the Rings sprawls years, location. So, like, I dig all of the things that you said about, like, making the travel really meaningful and matterful. And I think, so here's another thing I think could potentially help, is that I think there's something to the fact that Tolkien has parallel narratives, where you can kind of see how each side is kind of impacting the other side without them even necessarily knowing it. So, like, when they're at the Black Gate challenging Sauron to that final encounter, Frodo and Sam, you know, it clears out the army so Frodo and Sam can get to Mount Doom. Like, during Minas Tirith, you know, like, in both cases, the actions of the one are impacting the actions of the other. Now, I'm not suggesting that you split the party up, because I think that's a terrible idea. But if you establish a couple of important NPCs early on, and then you have them split off into their own parallel quest, that kind of helps to give you, you know, this, you know, maybe you give the party little updates about how they're doing based on their own actions. And then, you know, maybe the things that is happening to your party is happening because of the actions of the other side. Tolkien was apparently very nitpicky to make sure that his storylines lined up in logical ways. And with an NPC side quest, you can help achieve this as well. And then one last quick thing. So there's a webcomic that kind of takes Lord of the Rings and lovingly mocks it a little bit. It turns into a D&D campaign. So things like, why did the Fellowship split up? You had player burnout. Why did Aragorn start, like, caring? And it's because his PC found out that he was a secret heir to the kingdom. It's a lot of fun, but it does point out some of the absurdity of what D&D has become, or maybe some of how Lord of the Rings, while amazing and while epic, isn't necessarily the type of adventure that we've grown used to in things like Dungeons and Dragons. It's not impossible, but I think that there are some weird little things that could present some weird little tweaks you can make to make it feel Lord of the Ringsy, while still kind of maintaining that 5th edition feel. So
nice.
Yeah, that's my last thought. It's my last point.
Yeah.
So,
the only other thing that I have, and I might just impose this at the end of what you said in battles, because I realize now it's probably better fit for another area. However, I do think that if you want those big epic battles, and you want there to be like 30, 40 orcs just surrounding them. 4th edition had a really good minion system where minions were a special type of creature that DMs could employ. And the idea was that they fundamentally worked as a normal monster. They had an AC, they had damage. The only thing is that they only had 1 HP. So they were very susceptible to attacks, AoE and stuff. But like, the idea is that if you want, like, because let's face it, in Lord of the Rings, all those cool epic battles, it's like Legolas and Gimli, like, having a kill counter and being like, ha, I've killed 70 of these fucks, how about you? And stuff like that. So, like, having these very easy to kill, but still semi-dangerous people swarming the party at various moments can lead to these really epic moments where you can, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm a level 5 fighter, and so my first attack, I kill this first guy, and then I swing over and kill the other guy, and then I kick this other orc off of a cliff, killing him as well. Like, you have these cool ways to make moments like that so that it feels like Lord of the Rings.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But that's all I got in terms of making a Lord of the Rings style game.
Yeah. Hey Cody.
Yeah.
If people like this episode and they wanted to learn more, where's a place that they could learn more?
They could go to the nexus of all things Fandom Roulette. They can go to our website at www.fandomroulette.com, where all of our episodes go live every time they're uploaded. And if you scroll down, you can see a little bio about the things we're working on and who we are as people. And then if you scroll all the way down right before the social media links, there's a little area where you can send us basically fan mail or even just like ideas for Nerdy Affair. If there's something that is interesting to you and you can't quite think of how you would run that at a table, send it to us and we can start looking at that and find ways to create this stuff. Nerdy Affair and some of the other shows are kind of, we designed them so that with the fans in mind. So if you have an idea that you'd love to see us tackle, hit us up on our website.
Yeah, agreed. And hey, also Cody, if people wanted to find, if they like this and they wanted to share it with a friend, where are some places that their friends could find episodes of Fandom Roulette?
Oh boy, we're on a ton of different stuff like SoundCloud and Spotify and Google Play and YouTube. And basically your RSS catching feeds. All you gotta do is search Fandom Roulette.
Yeah, and if there's what are some social media places that they can find us?
Yeah, if you want to guess as to who you and the group of adventurers' question is for, or you just want to tell us how you felt about our nerdy affair, you can get at us on Twitter at fandomr_podcast. That is our Twitter handle. And on Facebook and Instagram, we are also Fandom Roulette.
Yes. And I think that's it. Yeah. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Please
smash the bell.
Smash the bell. Leave us some nice, thoughts, things like that. At the moment, we're working on building this thing up, and all of your support helps us get a little bit stronger and reach some more people. So
yeah, we greatly appreciate any
together.
Yeah.
And then I guess that's it. So signing off for Fandom Roulette, this is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And as always, stay nerdy.
Stay super nerdy.